Tom Rankin's my name. I live in the Squamish Valley, and I am a member of the community that is responsible for Bill 30 being invoked. Bill 30 was a gift by the Premier to Ledcor of a river near my house, and I'd like that river to be kept free, and I'd like Ledcor not to be working there. There were two public processes involved in denying Ledcor zoning in that area. They were fair, they were broad, and it's unfair that the Premier of the province of British Columbia is acting against the will of the people. And I would like to encourage the people to stand up against the Premier of British Columbia and help their community governments at the end of October to work to rescind Bill 30. Bill 30 is a small piece of legislation inside a large piece of legislation called a housekeeping bill. And inside that bill, Section 56, I think it is now, independent power producers who are corporations who are largely anonymous or untraceable in some cases, have the right to be, they will be appointed as agents of government. They'll have the ability to expropriate property. They will also have the ability to take our rivers and export all of their power from the rivers, all of the power from the rivers, and put the money in their pockets in remote places. The income to the public from all of those kinds of deals is pretty much zero. And in the recent publication of Common Ground, the October issue, which is out today, and I encourage everyone watching this to get a hold of it, or go to the website at hydrofaxbc.ca. The specific information is quite clear, and that information on private power projects is that the average price being paid to the companies for the power in the purchase orders is $100 per megawatt hour. Our current cost of power is $6 a megawatt hour through our British Columbia power system. That's not the price at the door, that's the price at the generating stations of hydro.
Okay, Shane Simpson, MLA for Vancouver Hastings, NDP opposition critic for the environment.
Okay. Are you familiar with the fact that they're in there working now without permits, just using Bill 30?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Bill 30 was written for Ledcor. The motivation for Bill 30 was the Ashley River and the Ledcor situation. This is a company that has been very friendly to the BC Liberals, has given the BC Liberals thousands and thousands of dollars over the last number of years. It's a company that the Minister of Energy intervened directly to try and pressure local governments to reverse their position and allow this project to go ahead. Local governments in the Squamish-Lillooet area resisted because this was not in the public interest as they viewed it. And what we have now seen is the government, when they couldn't browbeat local government into reversing their position, simply used the legislative hammer to run them over. And that's what they've done. And the implications of what happened there, now we're going to see resonate across the province, I suspect, as we see increasing numbers of Ledcor-like projects being brought forward, but not brought forward for a discussion with local government about community interest, but simply being directed through the Utilities Commission, which has a very narrow mandate, and approved there and going ahead.
Okay. I would encourage everyone to read this month's issue, the October 2006 issue of Common Ground. Inside that issue there is an insert saying BC Hydro. It says BC's electric power scandal.
Well, I think it affects all British Columbians because it affects people in terms of the security of power, the price of power. It will affect our business communities. It will affect our small communities particularly. So I don't think it's limited at all to one particular sector of society. It's an integral part of our future, and I think everybody will be affected by it. I think if there's I think the issue that we see here around around the future of power in this province. It's a critical debate, the future of power. It impacts us in every aspect of our lives, whether it be at a personal level in terms of our personal security and interests, whether it's at a community level in terms of how communities get to develop and evolve and look after their own interests, and at a business level. It also affects us environmentally. As we move forward to look at our environmental interests, how we produce and deliver our power is a critical piece of that scenario. In order to look after the best interests of British Columbians, there needs to be more than a simple bottom line to this. And the reality is, private companies have one primary interest, and I don't begrudge them that, and that's to make profit. And that's to maximize their profit through whatever service it is they deliver. And that's what they do. But that's not always the public interest. The public interest is much broader than that, and it is about a sustainable interest in social, economic, and environmental terms, as well as in community development terms. Companies like BC Hydro that are owned by the public have the capacity and the obligation, I would say, to take those broader interests into consideration. The private companies don't have that obligation. It's not part of their mandate. On issues as fundamental as our power in British Columbia and how we produce it and how we deliver it, we have to have that broader perspective. If we don't, the consequences of that will be very, very severe for everybody in this province down the road. And at present, we are losing that. As Hydro's interest is diminished, the public interest is diminished.
Our energy is pretty much inside the hands of BC Hydro. BC Hydro is being stealthily dismantled by this government, and if you have time to read this issue of Common Ground, then you'll find in it the specific details that I am now going to speak about. Okay, we have a public energy system in British Columbia called BC Hydro. BC Hydro has given this province steady, even prices for power since the early 50s when WAC Bennett essentially put the corporation together. It's a Crown corporation. Until just very recently, this past few years, that corporation has been very steady. It produces for us almost $1 billion a year in income that go to the public coffers. In today's world, that's a lot of money. And what we're facing here is the Enronization of BC Hydro. Unfortunately, we're in a position where in the month of October, if we as a society do not take the offensive and act for ourselves, then we will lose this asset. And in a world that we live in today, to lose a steady asset like your water-powered energy systems is just simply beyond one's ability to contemplate. And so, the only possible way that we can save our water-powered energy systems is by the action of the people. And if people will act, then we can save it. So the situation that we now face is that the province is telling people that they are keeping BC Hydro public while they are systematically setting it up for a deregulated, failed monopoly. We have a monopoly. So the situation works like this. BC Hydro is a vertically integrated utility, which means it has billing, transmission, and production. As you may or may not be aware, production has been put in private hands. BC Hydro can't make more power for us because of this leadership. And the transmission system has been placed in a new Crown corporation called the BC Transmission Corporation. The only purpose in setting aside the Transmission Corporation is to Enronize British Columbia Hydro. In the United States, under standard market design, which you may or may not be aware of, back in the early Bush administration, George Bush's father's administration, standard market design was brought on by Ken Lay and Enron, which meant that essentially the transmission systems would be set aside so that Mr. Lay and his friends could have hubs and give everybody secure power. What it did was it made Mr. Lay and his Enron people extremely wealthy. But in regard to our electric system, there is something we can do about it. Although the situation is staged to fail, the transmission system is still ours under the BC Transmission Corporation. On the 13th of July this year, the BC Utilities Commission pledged our transmission system into a hub in the United States. Money is freedom in this society, and our freedom comes from our money, and our money is in BC Hydro. And we need to keep the system alive and in our hands and inside our control. So the purpose of setting the transmission system aside is to break the monopoly that we have, and the monopoly that we have delivers the low prices to us. So let me now go forward. There are 3 regions in the province where the public has spoken clearly. Those 3 regions are the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District, Kitimat Region, the District of Kitimat, and the Kootenay Boundary Region. And in each 3 of those regions in British Columbia, there have been long public processes, all of which have resulted in the populations saying that they've expressed themselves, and the government has taken what they have said and swept them aside. So in these 3 locations, at Christina Lake, Cascade Falls, where the Kettle River enters into Christina Lake, the regional district has worked for 15 years to keep the place clear of a U.S. transnational called Seabreeze Energy, who's been trying for that long to get a power project in there. In the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District, the ASHLU was the subject of a land resource management plan, an extensive one, went on for years. It and I think 10 other rivers were named to be named to not be industrialized. And then a company called Leadcore Industries out of Vancouver. That same company has a number of water licenses, one of them being on the ASHLU. And they pursued a power project on the ASHLU, and it went through a long public hearing process. At the end of that public hearing process, their application was denied. Then it was denied again. And now the government has given that river to Leadcore by means of Bill 30.
Well, Bill 30 was written for Leadcore. The motivation for Bill 30 was the Ashley River and the Leadcore situation. This is a company that has been very friendly to the BC Liberals, has given the BC Liberals thousands and thousands of dollars over the last number of years. It's a company that the Minister of Energy intervened directly to try and pressure local governments to reverse their position and allow this project to go ahead. Local governments in the Squamish-Lillooet area resisted because this was not in the public interest as they viewed it. And what we have now seen is the government, when they couldn't browbeat local government into reversing their position, simply used the legislative hammer to run them over. And that's what they've done. And the implications of what happened there now we're going to see resonate across the province, I suspect, as we see increasing numbers of Leadcore-like projects being brought forward, but not brought forward for a discussion with local government about community interest, but simply being directed through the Utilities Commission, which has a very narrow mandate, and approved there and going ahead.
So the people in the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District have spoken very clearly, and they do not want the ASHLU to be industrialized, and today Leadcore is in there destroying the place. It's a grizzly habitat. It's an incredible jewel, and Leadcore is moving as quickly as they possibly can in the fall to get ahead of you, essentially. And so the other region is Kitimat. And in Kitimat, in 1950, the government of British Columbia gave the Aluminum Company of Canada a river called the Nechako to make aluminum. That was the purpose of the transaction. And they could also make power if it developed industry in the area. And so they do. In fact, they did and do make additional power from this tremendous resource that we gave them. It was a horrendous cost to the local people, the First Nations, etc., but nonetheless, that program went forward. And in 2001, when Alcan wrote what became the BC Energy Plan, Alcan began to slow the smelter in Kitimat. And as they slowed the smelter, they freed up more and more power, which they've been selling into our BC Hydro grid. But the purpose of the Alcan negotiations recently directly with the Premier is to get themselves entrenched as a private power producer so that they can have that license to export power when BC Hydro is destroyed as a public utility. So there's 3 regions where the public has said no, and in these 3 regions, the Premier essentially is acting against our interest and certainly our will. So what's come to us is going to come to the rest of the province. Bill 30 gave the Ashley to Ledcor, and Bill 30 does an unusual thing. Bill 30 takes the vote away from all of us in regard to vetoing or stopping something that we feel is wrong, and a power project that we might feel is wrong. So it removes our ability to vote. And after 100 years of the Municipal Act and a system that's worked quite well, one has to ask themselves why that might be the case. And the reason for that is that a few of the world's richest people are in the process of taking over our rivers and our water assets and our power assets. And it's going to happen in the month of October if we don't stop it.